So good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our fourth day of our 5-day Manager Return to Work workshop. So hopefully you're getting to know. I'm Scott Cuthbert, CEO, co-founder of Safepedia, and with me is Tamara Paris, our Director of Community Development. She's helping with all the technical aspects behind the screens today. We hope you've enjoyed the workshop so far and you're gaining valuable insight into developing a sustainable return to work program. Certainly looking forward to today's presentation. At Safepedia, as we've been discussing, our mandate's to harness the collective genius of the health and safety industry and bring it together, the expertise, and encourage collaboration. So we've been streaming these sessions through Facebook Live, encouraging people to join our group, Safety Movement Makers. And it's a private group, so all the comments and discussions are private within the group, and we're encouraging professionals to connect with each other, share some of their challenges, pose questions, and reach out to the presenters as well. It's new for us, so we're looking for feedback, ideas, criticisms on how it's going and whether it's helping collaborate and get you the information that you need, or or if a Zoom meeting is sufficient for these types of workshops. As I mentioned on day 3, we're going to be doing a draw for 2 free VIP experiences at the end of the session today. So that's for our virtual conference Safety Connect. The VIP experience, I posted a graphic in the Facebook group, and tomorrow I'll send an email out to everybody. But it includes attending 3 of the VIP sessions that we're going to have at the conference. There's going to be golf shirts, backpacks, hoodies, Platinum Club networking session at the virtual conference, and a premium PPE sample bundle for 6 months. So we're excited about awarding those door prizes today, and one of our partners, Safety Guard, distributor out of Chicago of PPE, has offered to sponsor the VIP packages. So thank you to Lauren and his team over at Safety Guard for that sponsorship. Really appreciate it. And again, we'll have some information regarding Safety Guard in the email and the Facebook post. All right, so without any further ado, I would like to introduce Pat King, CEO and co-founder of OneLook Systems, and Nick Greig, head of sales and marketing for OneLook Systems. And they'll be walking you through the presentation today. Again, similar style, open for questions. Post them in the chat in Zoom. Post them in the Facebook group, Safety Movement Makers, and we'll do our best to get to all those questions today. All right, Pat, Nick, take it away.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Please ask questions as we're going. We'll try to keep this interactive if possible. If you don't have any questions, myself and Nick have no problem just talking away. We're well used to it. So hopefully you'll want to ask some questions, just maybe to stop us from talking, and that's okay too. I might just start out by saying, here we are, this is our office. We're based in Cork, Ireland. As you can see behind me, like Scott, I'm isolating within the office. It's empty except for my wife Fiona, who works here as well. And as you guys know, as many of you know, you get very, very used to working in an office or working in your space on your own. And with COVID, we've become sort of very protective of our space. And that's certainly happened here. We had just finished remodeling this office maybe 3 or 4 weeks before we had to shut it down. So it really does sort of feel like my own private space. And I suppose that's something that's probably not the best thing, but it is just really where we're at. But a couple of weeks ago, I guess maybe about a month ago now, there was a knock on the door. And I assumed it was somebody with a delivery, and I went to tell them to just leave the package, in the entranceway. And it was somebody there who was there to check the fire alarms. And my first instinct was, oh no, someone's going to come in my space. It was really sort of scary. But I was thinking, oh, wait a minute, actually, we do need to have the fire alarms checked. It was really important because it was a new build. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is what we do. And then I just sort of relaxed a minute. I asked him, what's your email address? And he gave me his email address, and I quickly sent him a login to create a permit and to do an online induction. And so he went out to his car and he did an online induction. We interacted online, And so then he came back upstairs. I had all the doors open for him. I was wearing a mask. He was wearing a mask. He came in. He didn't have to touch anything. He was able to test all of the fire alarms, and then he was able to leave. And it was a really nice experience. But the reason that I'm bringing it up is because if I had asked somebody who was just coming to test the fire alarms to go out to their car, take an induction, and to log in and do an electronic permit, that would have seemed way, way over the top. But it wasn't over the top now. It wasn't over the top at all. In fact, he was really relieved, and so was I. So not only was it not over the top, but it was actually something that people were really happy about. And that is how technology is changing. I might pass it over to Nick now and just kind of talk about a little bit about who we are, besides letting people into test fire alarms, who we are and what we do. Nick, do you want to go from here?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Look, it's funny, Pat's given you a story about the now in this COVID situation, and essentially what the future is going to look like, that normalization. But in Ireland, we have a saying, and that saying is, to know where you're going to, you have to know where you're coming from, which is, of course, utter rubbish. But essentially, in this scenario, what we're talking about here is that the future of control of work being more acceptable to more businesses, to more people, is because of those that have gone before. And it's important to know that the use of technology when it comes to the checks and controls, health and safety, the control of work, the management of contractors, has been pioneered over a significant number of years now by organizations of all types around the world. And OneLook Systems is now operating the world's most used electronic permit to work system. And just some of the clients, these are just some of our clients, which are some of the wider community. I mean, it is a movement that is, moving towards that intrinsic use of technology to help them in their objectives, in their health and safety objectives. And Pat, if you could move to
sorry, Nick, I was just listening to what you were saying and forgetting to move the slides forward.
That's
Make a little ding sound if you want, and I'll know to.
Ding, ding, ding. But look, I think it's important to set some type of, I don't know, line in the sand. What is it that we're meaning by control of work? Well, there are a number of definitions of control of work, some really complex, some boring, some, that hit the nail on the head. And one of these is, look, it's the management of business critical maintenance processes made up of hazard identification, risk assessment, permit to work, and isolation management. And that's not a bad definition. You can add words and phrases like integrated process. However, for today, and the reason for this slide is I want to be more practical and look at how control of work relates to different stages or steps along the journey taken when you're bringing in external workers. After all research shows that contractors pose the greatest threat to health and safety at your site. So look, let's just try and look at the general journey from beginning to end. And you'll see a guy in a top hat. Let's call that guy Tom. And typically, and this is this is yourself. Tom. Tom's in need of having work done, and Tom needs, however, to be able to quickly and simply find the right qualified person to do that work, the right company that has the right reputation. So, of course, what they're doing now and have done over the last number of years is use technology to find pre-qualified, vetted companies. And then, of course, Tom, Mary, Jane, Bob are looking to, do a risk assessment for that job. They're looking to make sure that all of the documentation is in place for that contractor. They're wanting to issue a permit. But the thing is that actually, and where technology has gone over the last number of years, is that whilst a contractor may be pre-qualified and vetted. They could be qualified. Are they qualified to do that specific job? And that's where technology is being able to drive almost specifics. Being able to understand, okay, are we exposed? Does that person have the asbestos training? Do they have the lifting equipment training? And of course, the other thing is, do they have induction? Have they passed the induction to come onto our specific site? So now where technology, and especially with regards to COVID, and Pat will touch on this more later, is that technology is then enabling users of electronic control of work systems to actually enable contractors to do their inductions away from their sites. So before they come anywhere near anyone on their sites, the contractors are able to do a video presentation, answer questions, all via a mobile device or via a laptop at home. And of course, then the next part of the journey is that the contractor can be issued a permit to work. They can actually even be issued sort of a permit to access in this current day. And then they arrive. And actually, one of the biggest gaps and one of the greatest benefits of technology for the Googles, the GSKs, the Abbotts, the Diageos, and you know, we work with over 80% of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. So we've got huge experience in this area. We also work with the world's largest food and beverage organizations. And across them all, and you'd love to think that they get it all right. But actually, there's this massive
Don't name any
gap.
names here, Nick.
and there's massive gap. And one of the biggest gaps is what happens when that van or that car arrives on site. What happens with the visibility of security? So now what they're needing is, and where technology has helped, is where there can be visibility across all departments, you know, from security through to the permit issuing office, through to the senior management of the contractor coming on site, together with the controls. Have they been passed? And of course, then the work is being done. And it's absolutely vital that the checks and controls are in place, both physically on site, manually, something that technology is never going to be able to take over from, which is us. And then obviously there's that closing of the permit, and there's those notifications. There's technology making life simpler, especially at the latter part of the journey, where you see the bottom of the road, which is the fact that now, in terms of that closed permit, where do you store it? In the past, it's always been in filing cabinets. It's been difficult to find. How do you report? What happens when the auditor turns up? In the past, auditing has taken, and it may be an experience of some of you now, but for our clients previously, it would have taken weeks to prepare for an audit. Literally now,
Months.
It's hours. And actually, in terms of finding a specific record, it's minutes. So that's essentially
that's where we're at now, Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we're at now.
What we're talking about, and that's what we're talking about now. And that's how technology, and that's the areas that we're talking about, that control of work, that control of contractor activity, that threat that comes onto your site.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay,
And we'll get into what comes next as well. But just kind of firstly, if we just even look at kind of tech from 2008 to 2019. So I'm sure that most people here have gone through risk assessments, paper risk assessments and paper permits and paper visitor systems, and what you're looking at here is super familiar. So the problem in 2008 with you know, the managing and the control of working was really about making sure that the processes did what they were supposed to do. And they were supposed to make sure that everybody who was doing the work knew what they were supposed to do. In short, you have an SOP and you needed something to make sure the SOP was followed. But the SOP was in a filing cabinet, and the processes to make sure that everything was followed were on a piece of paper. And so not only did you have to deal with, you know, reading through an entire sheet of paper to understand what you were doing, you had to make sure that you had to prove that you've been compliant, so that not only did you have to do it in advance, but you also had to save that piece of paper. And then when an auditor came, you would had to go into your filing cabinet, find a permit on a specific date, open it up, and read down there and pray that the person who was working that day filled it out in a way that was legible, signed the permit when they were done, and closed it. And so that was a huge part of sort of life in regulated industry or any high risk or medium risk industry before 2008. And look at how exciting it is. In 2019, it looks almost exactly the same. But there's a reason for that. This is still a piece of paper, but it's been generated electronically. And that provides a lot of benefit. So in 2019, there was still a dependency on this piece of paper because people were still very, very comfortable with having a piece of paper. Even if you signed it electronically on an iPad, a lot of people still wanted to print it out. And even like the really progressive companies that didn't want to print it out still ended up having a PDF that they showed on a handheld device. And it was just a static document. And so that from 11 years, from 2008 to 2019, it went so far. And it wasn't for the lack of technology that it didn't go further. It was for the lack of people's comfort in using technology. And I don't want to say that, you know, it wasn't great. Technology was great. And being able to do this, you know, really does make a huge difference. And you no longer have to be certain that, or you no longer have to be worried that a permit was filled out completely. You can be guaranteed of it. You no longer have to have somebody go through only, or go through every bit of information just to pick out the relevant information and then be scared that they automatically tick boxes. You know, you can use a lot of intelligence to make sure that the right information is put in front of people and they answer the questions appropriately. Essentially, it takes the relevant information out of your SOP from your filing cabinet and puts it right in front of the person when they're preparing the work, when they're scheduling the work, and then of course when they're doing the work. But it's still static.
I think, sorry, if I can just jump in.
Yeah,
there,
please.
I think there is one other very important difference that as well, where everything has moved in the last 10 years is that it's actually not about the paper anymore. It's about, so if you look at the permit's about what work, where the work is, when the work is, what's required for that work to be done. But there's also another element, and that's the who. And the who isn't just now a name on a sheet. That who is a cross-checked compliant contractor. The ability, what technology has been able to do over the last 10 years, has been able to match that piece of paper to the record of an individual. And that individual cannot do that work unless they're compliant. So it's certainly in the last 10 years, that tying of compliance with the ability to do the work has been
it's technology integrating the risk assessments, the controls, the hazards, the permits, and the vetting of contractors that's specific to the type of work. And that is a huge leap and bound. So I'm not giving it the credit it deserves when I say it's still a static document. There is quite a bit that it does. Thanks, Nick. So this is how the future, or this is how technology shifts. If this was not on Zoom, if I was talking to a group of people here, I would ask somebody if they could give me an example of technology that started out radical, but now is something that's required. And I can guarantee you, somebody would say, cell phones. I'd say, oh, great example. I never thought of that before, which of course is the obvious one. But when you think about it, you know, the future or how technology shifts, when you look at Wall Street and you see Gecko with a mobile phone in the back of a limousine, that's radical. You know, that's exciting. And then, you know, when your older brother or your uncle showed you the first mobile phone in the 90s, I'm taking this from personal experience here, everybody. That was cutting edge, you know. And then, you know, over time, it didn't seem like over the top to have a mobile phone, and then my mom got one, and then it was normal. And then when my kids were preteens, they let me know very clearly that everybody needs a mobile phone. It's what's expected. And of course now it is absolutely required for us to do our job. And that's the life cycle of technology. And it's not just mobile phones, it's relevant to any type of technology. And Nick, maybe you can talk about that a little bit more, but more relevant to sort of health and safety and not so much to mobile phones.
Yeah, look, I think it's a good time for a story. I'm not saying it's going to be the best story you've ever heard. I certainly wouldn't call it a bedtime story. Yeah, look, I'd like to illustrate that kind of that transition by sort of sharing the story of one of our earliest clients and the journey they've taken over the last 11 years. So in 2009, we were approached by a small Irish-based site belonging to a North American pharmaceutical company that is actually one of the world's top 3. So you can start narrowing it down. And they had some very real problems around control of work. And they'd heard about a small technology startup that was disrupting the norm of paper control of work processes, obviously us. And when we met them, it became clear that there were 3 specific areas that were damaging their ability to control risk when needing maintenance and construction work done on site. So number 1, and look, you know, you may well identify with some of these, but there was worry that permits were being issued to contractors who weren't qualified and insured to conduct the specific work being requested. Actually, it's not that the contractors weren't qualified, you know, and it wasn't necessarily that a third party hadn't vetted them. It was more the fact that they didn't have the evidence and absolute confidence at their end. Secondly, their paper permit to work process was a pain in the neck when it came to time and resources. This led to queues outside the permit issuer's door and individuals potentially making shortcuts around checks and controls that had an impact on risk. Once again, it's not that they were making shortcuts, but there was a lack of confidence that people weren't doing that. Thirdly, the third major problem that they kind of were suffering from under this kind of the non-technological approach was this: management had a limited ability to assess risk, either in real time or for future planned work. And this was due to a lack of interactive visualization of current and upcoming work activity. And as I say this, what's funny is that as we talk to you today and reflect back over the last 11 years, it's very clear that those very same problems have not only driven the move by thousands of the other companies globally that have moved away from paper. And it's, you know, it's relevant to those companies that actually drove our growth as a company, you know, away from a shared office within an innovation center into the beautiful offices that you see there with Pat that I can't get to for the last 4 months. But anyway, look, the Irish site became the first site globally within this huge pharma organization to implement Safe Permit. And no one else really became aware of their move within this organization until 2011. And what made others aware was something very simple, that essentially there was a global health and safety audit. And of the 40 plus manufacturing sites globally, only 1 passed. And yes, it was the Irish site. Not only that, but it also turned out that the Irish team spent 90% less time than their colleagues preparing for the audit. Because essentially all of the qualification, all of the documentation, all of the permits, all of the reporting was stored online. And as a result, Safe Permit, or an electronic control of work process, was spread across over 30 sites across North America, Ireland, UK, Central America, and Singapore. And they're generating, this company are now generating thousands of permits through the Safe Permit system every month. So finally, what's happened to those problems that we highlighted earlier? Well, as recently as last month, we asked them. We asked the global governance leadership where they felt technology had delivered the greatest benefits. And essentially they said 4 things really. they now have absolute confidence that no one can conduct potentially hazardous work on sites without being fully qualified, that training and induction is in date, that fully aware of correct procedures, properly authorized, and through global sort of enterprise level dashboards, which, look, I don't know if any of you here are looking at across multi-sites, but they also, as an organization, got that ability to actually benchmark performance as well. They were able to look at the compliance levels across different sites, which is, once again, just something that's impossible to do with a more manual process. Because if you can benchmark, you can also get better as well, and you can start achieving your objectives. So then the second most measurable return on investment was, in fact, was it the second most, or is it just the second point I'm saying? Actually,
it's probably okay.
it was actually the most, it's probably the biggest return. And that is that each site is recording up to 90% time savings across their contractor search, permit raising, permit approval, control checking, and permit closing processes. So that journey that we talked to you before, and that in turn is equating to around $41,000. So they sent their counters in, they sent their finance teams in. They also looked at their carbon counts as well. But in terms of physical cost savings, they were saving $41,000 per site.
And what's great about that? Sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, Pat, please do.
Yeah. So, and what's great about that is that they were the site that were radical, and it was really easy then for other sites to see, oh, actually, that's not actually radical. That should be what's expected in the future. And obviously for us, that was great, because that meant that was eventually rolled out across the entire organization. Initially, it was anytime anybody ever failed an audit, the first thing they had to do was put in an electronic system here at this spot. Yeah, we got a question in from. I'll let you finish your story, and then I've got a question from Crystal, which I'll get to. Sorry.
So then the third key, and this. So and obviously I'm wanting people here on this this call to just be thinking about their own pains, their own kind of areas where they feel as if they can improve. When you get the chance, when you close your eyes and you sit back and you think, are we doing as well as we can? Do we have that absolute confidence? Is there anything that you identify here, which is, and the other thing is, so for example, even across the simplest of sites, do you have real-time and in advance visualization, which is going to be really key now in this post-COVID world? Do you have real-time and in advance visualization of permit to work activity, or JHHSA activity, so that you can actually assess risk in advance? Because what's happened to date, and what the problem for so many sites is, that they're actually assessing risk on jobs in the future on what's happened in the past, rather than actually looking at the future and actually looking at, okay, we have X number of contractors in this area. Oh, geez, actually, we've got contractors doing different work in the same area, and one of those is, it involves hot work. So now, crumbs, we've got a conflict here. So that's also where they're at. So look, finally, perhaps the greatest benefit that this client has seen over the last 6 months, where technology has helped keep workers healthy and safe at every site, whilst at the same time keeping operations open and processes running smoothly. That's the benefit. It's the fact that they've been able to not just reopen, but stay open. And keeping COVID-19 off sites wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been for the fact that technology had led to one benefit they hadn't really thought about previously. Essentially, the ability to join up all of the elements of the control of work process into one interface. The simple searching and selecting of relevantly qualified contractors. We've already talked about that. Making sure that the vendor company was also maintaining strong COVID-19 health and safety policies. That's really important in this day and age, and Pat will come onto that in more detail. Are your partners really partners in this journey? Are the contractors inducted in COVID-19 procedures before they come anywhere near the site? Is there intuitive filling out of necessary permits, and checks? is there once again. Think about the security team. Think about that car turning up. You want to be able to, for that person not to be able to get out of the car, for you to be able to check that they're actually compliant. So talking about how now technology is applied to COVID-19, manufacturing, health and safety, I'm going to hand back to Pat, who will take it from there.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, no, and that is a great example of technology being used. And we got a question in from Crystal. Thank you for that. And this is, the question was, when switching to an electronic system, what do you do about EX-rated areas? And a lot of the EX-rated devices have been very clunky. So all the will in the world is there to use an electronic system, but when you need to go into a highly flammable area and you have to use a certain type of technology, it doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. So you're forced to go back to paper. And that was a lot of reason why our shift happened the way it happened. We always had to take a very pragmatic approach towards paper. And the reason is because if it didn't make sense to switch to electronic, then we wouldn't do it. Why make everything electronic if it doesn't have to be? So only switch when you absolutely have to switch. So to answer your question, I don't have a specific answer to the type of technology, but we do have a lot of companies that have gone fully electronic, and I will get back to you on that and ask what they're using. But what I do know is that the devices they are using can still be clunky. So it's really important that the areas and the monitoring and the risk assessment that's done in an EX-rated area or in a high-risk area is very simple, just button pushing. That you don't actually have to create the entire list of information at that point. So it does really require process flows. But actually, the kind of the next slide might show some help us in the future, or at least give us an idea of how it's going to help us in the future.
And I was going to jump in, Pat. Sorry.
Yeah, please. Thanks, Scott.
It sounds like you guys might be going in that direction, but I was curious with what you're seeing in industry. Obviously, COVID, Pat, your example of the fire extinguisher inspection or security system inspection. I'm wondering if the fear of COVID and social distancing is going to create a risk where we're not inspecting the work. We're not ensuring that people have the proper qualifications because we're a little bit anxious about exposure to COVID-19. So we're letting things slide a little bit. And again, maybe you're getting there, but just curious. Obviously, I think it was Nick's second point about the controls at 95 or 98% accurate. But if you're getting there, sorry, if not.
No, actually, I was going in a different direction. So I'm really glad you brought that up because it is something that I'm very comfortable to talk about. So yeah, no, thanks for that, because it is very much one of the biggest problems with technology, and that's people not using it. And so it is a real fear that, and you see it. People skip processes because they're trying to work around. I mean, what is it? There was an example that I saw recently. Yeah, it was an example where I saw people propping open fire doors so that they wouldn't have to have people touch them. And I don't know the right answer to that. I'm certain that the people who are listening today have come across that and figured out different ways to do it. I know that the answer that we came up with here is that when we do have people come back, we had costs associated with being able to automatically open and close fire doors, and it's an expensive option, but comparatively speaking, it's not a huge deal. But without the ability to pay for automatic doors, people have been propping fire doors open, and you're balancing out two risks. And I suppose the other thing that it does, and I'm just kind of jumping back to the slide there, is this technological shift has sped up massively. So when you think about how long it took for a mobile phone to be used, you're looking at 30 years. When you're looking about how long it took to go from a purely paper permit system to an integrated permit and risk system that still used a piece of paper at the end, I mean, that was 11 years. And what's happening now is that has sped up so fast. So what seemed radical, or at least slightly annoying by me having the fire inspector or the fire inspector go out, fill out a permit and do an induction before he came on site for a relatively small office, was now not only required, but it was appreciated and it was normal. And that only happened in about 4 months, and it's everything. Your parents and grandparents are fantastic with Zoom, I imagine. I don't think they were expecting to be. You know, even offices and so many companies that were very much against working from home now are very happy to work from home and encouraging it and really see the benefit of it. And, you know, there may have been people who've been trying to persuade that change to happen for a number of years, but that happened very quickly. You know, it probably took a couple of weeks for people to get used to it. So we are very much in a situation where technology is changing really quickly. For us, a technology health and safety company, that's really exciting. And for us as health and safety professionals, that's also really, really exciting. Because not only has technology increased, the speed of technology increased because technology is available, but it's people's willingness to use it, or people's willingness to use to follow safety procedures. Sorry, what I meant was not only is the technology shift sped up, but the shift in people's use of and acceptance of procedures from health and safety that they need to follow. So people are more likely to follow health and safety procedures now because they're living in a world that has so many risks, and they're more likely to use technology because they're more comfortable with technology. So those two things combined mean that things that we thought were going to happen a couple of years from now, maybe 3 or 4 years, are all going to be happening by the end of this year, and that's really exciting. I just want to see, has there been any other questions before I get on to the next area?
Yes, there was one actually. It was about implementation. So Rosa Carrillo, were there any forms of resistance from the workforce during or after implementation?
Yes. Especially, you know, during the implementation, especially early on, a lot of what we did, I'd say up to about 4 or 5 years ago, the majority of the project was spending time with the people who'd be filling out permits, getting them used to it, showing them that actually this is easier. There's templates, there's ways to do this that are a lot easier. That's changed a lot. I think once people got used to mobile phones and how apps worked, they were a lot more comfortable. But I think early on that was the largest part of a project implementation, was making sure we spent the time to get everybody comfortable with the system. We really prioritized early on in the projects to meet with the users of the system, to make sure that they had an input in order to ensure that they were happy with how the system went. We have the opposite problem now, is that everybody who has been using a mobile phone for a couple of years is an expert on software, so they wanted to do more and more, and they wanted to do everything, and sometimes so it can turn out that it's the opposite problem.
And actually, we are seeing less resistance as well. We do a lot of work talking to our clients, and we're seeing a lot more buy-in to kind of not the technology itself, but almost like the processes and behaviors that the technology is enabling since COVID, because obviously, you know, everyone on site is very much aware of the importance of it, you know, and actually, I think one of the biggest shifts that we've seen as well is, and it relates back to the previous question about and Scott, you raising about, are people potentially, if I got the point right, is that are people potentially missing out on doing certain things, certain checks, certain controls, because they're worried about how COVID, and maybe getting out of their office. And the thing is that actually what we're hearing is that people are, obviously in that case, people are feeling not safe. But safety, and they're scared. They're scared to work. But what technology is enabling them to do is realize that their safety, their comfort, their confidence isn't just coming from training, because it's not the key thing that's happening on sites is that technology is enabling behavioral change, and behavioral change comes from repeatability, and not just the fact that people are doing a COVID-19 inductions once, but they're doing it on a weekly basis. And the fact that organizations are now able to scale that, where manual processes of Excel spreadsheets, once you get beyond 50 people, it's impossible to scale. So people are starting to do that. There's no doubt that people were more scared to work, but the experience that we're hearing, and one of the biggest sort of like changes that we're seeing is that those behavioral changes.
Right.
So it's not technology at the forefront now. It's almost like technology is invisible. It's just enabling what they're wanting.
There's another question here from Kalish about, I think that's right, about people filling out the permits when they're sitting at the office rather than filling them out on the site as they're supposed to do it. And that was one of the, the big concerns when technology came is, well, how can you fill out a permit on your computer when you're supposed to be filling it out on site? And a smart technology system will be able to do both and do it in a way that makes everything easier. So how we address that is we had the majority of types of work and the majority of different types of areas already programmed into the system, so that if you were saying, I'm doing welding in a certain location, the system would know that that particular work has a certain number of hazards and a certain number of controls that has to happen. And so it would electronically identify all those controls based on those specific risks, but it would still create a permit, but highlighting those specific things and say, these are the things you must do before you go ahead. And so that was where a piece of paper would still be required, but it would make it a lot easier because first of all, they could see that there was hot work that was scheduled there. The fire alarms could be disabled and all that as you would expect. But it would also create a huge amount of visibility and make sure that it was very, very clear the specific hazards that were related to that. What's different now is that we don't have to have paper to fill that out while you're doing the hot work. So as you're doing the work, you're able to do a fire watch. You're able to ensure that the permit or risk assessments can be done while you're doing the work. So it was a challenge earlier on, and the best way to address the challenge was to have a combination of paper and electronics. So you still had visibility, you still had control, and you still had the obvious risks and controls highlighted to the people that needed them highlighted, but you didn't rely on it to be done at the desk and then for it to still be the same when they got to their desk or when they got to the work area.
So with my background before Safepedia, we were in industrial construction and definitely understood, the high risk type environment that you're describing. With COVID and so traceability in those high risk industries has probably been in place for decades, right? I'm curious if and I think there's a few people that have signed up that are maybe in industries without a lot of those high risk hazards, but traceability with COVID, have you seen migration of companies that may not have been in those high risk industries that are now seeking out your technology from a traceability perspective? Because obviously if somebody shows up in the office in your facility with COVID, you need to kind of backtrack that whole history.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to simplify the solution as well, so that it you're not worrying about hot work, but you're still trying to track contractors and visitors and on-site people?
We've now got software companies, insurance companies, call centers, that are all now, using the system, using technology to automate processes to keep people away from site, until they're ready. The checks, controls. We've been at the front line. Funnily enough, we've been at the front line since February the 1st, helping out, because essentially a lot of our clients are the vaccine producers, the essential goods manufacturers. So we've been from day one making sure that they can stay open. And what we very, over the next period was realizing that, whilst we worked with what would traditionally be called medium to high risk organizations, if people know Vedantics, Vedantics would have its classification of risk. But now every environment is a hazardous environment. Right. And even something as simple as the visitor book, in smaller companies, the usage of the same pen to write your name in the book, that's now a hazardous operation.
It's actually what we've seen is that we would have had a visitor system before, we would have had a risk assessment before, we would have had a permit before. And those are all now the same. And it's even more than visitors. We have situations where people are now working from home, but they have to come into the office occasionally or come back to their site to work for a couple hours or to even just to pick up things. So you have visitors, delivery drivers, low risk workers and high risk workers that now actually are all following the same process. So you have people who have worked at a factory or at an office building for a number of years, but now before they come back, they have to go into a system and make sure that they've taken the back to work induction, and it's only usually around 2 minutes, but they do have to take it, which shows that they understand the risks and they agree to follow them. And then they have to actually get a permit to go on site. And it seems hilarious that you'd have to have a permit to go onto your own site, but it really has made it a lot easier for the people who are trying to keep the people who have to go in every day safe. And what that does is it not only lets everybody know that the person coming on site is aware of the hazards and controls, but with technology, you can really control where somebody goes. So if I need to come onto a site, I can get clear instructions that I'm able to go in area C4, because in some cases we've even broken down facilities into grids and shown people this is your area where you can go. And then now we have a contact tracing that will identify anybody who is outside of the normal work who came in during specific hours and worked in specific areas, and then you can really use that a lot for contact tracing. And
that induction process you touched on, and I apologize if maybe you've already addressed it, but my son's playing soccer, football, I guess, for you, Nick, and they're trying to return to some kind of normalcy, back to practice at the very, very least. And before each practice, we have to submit a form that says, he isn't exhibiting any symptoms of COVID-19, right? So before induction might have been, are you qualified mechanic, electrician? But I'm assuming now we can have a checklist even for, like you say, office workers, just so that mitigating the company's risk, mitigating risk to employees. I'm getting people to go through a little survey questionnaire to say, I'm healthy, I don't have a fever, I don't have a cough.
Scott, just something, because actually my son, I have to do the same for my son. But it's interesting because you had two things there. You had the induction, but if it's anything like you're doing, like with my son, I then, every time he has to play, I have to just do a reconfirm that he has so it's a reconfirmation of his wellness. But we only had to do the induction once. And that's the issue. And that's the issue, in the sense of, because it comes back to what I talked about with regards to training and behavior, that I don't know the next time that parents will be asked to do the induction again, but pretty darn sure that it's, you know, it won't be for a number of weeks. And it was a number of weeks ago that we did the induction. And behavior is formed through that repeatability. And that's what businesses are doing, actually, which is beyond the sports clubs. Before, what you're seeing in the consumer world is actually, you know, those businesses that are taking it more seriously is actually it's making sure that contractors, for example, when they come on site, are doing an induction once a week.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's a little different about offices and the football pitch, soccer pitch, is I'm from America, but I've lived here in Ireland for 25 years, so I'm never sure which is right, no matter who I'm talking to. So I'll just say both all the time. But anyway, what's different about an office and a sporting place is that what you want in the office in your induction, you still needs to only be 1 or 2 minutes, but you want to make sure that they understand that they need to leave 6 feet between people. They understand that there are certain areas where they have to wear a mask. They understand that certain bathrooms may only be available for one person at a time. And they have to agree to follow those procedures, so that you're reminding them and you're forcing them to say, yes, I understand, and yes, I agree. So even if it's 2 or 3 minutes, a test at the end of it is something that's really, really helpful. And it seems like a lot to have people coming into an office take a test once a week, but it does actually make people feel safer. The people who have to be in there, it is okay for them to do that. It does help make them feel safer. So I think how are we doing? We're doing okay. I have a lot of actually kind of what I was talking about in kind of the future control of work processes and what they're going to look like in beyond 2020. We've already covered, but I might, unless there's any other questions, I might just quickly touch on these, and hopefully for everybody we can finish up at when they planned. Of course, if people still have questions, we'll go on for as long as we need. So the first one that before arriving is that everyone coming on site will assume they need to register online and will expect online instructions. So that's very much what we're talking about in that. Even if you're a colleague coming back or somebody fixing the smoke detector, it's now an expectation that you're going to be using some sort of system before you can go anywhere. And then risk controls and qualifications are going to now be electronically identified, because we don't want situations where we're posting in information. You know, we want to reduce the amount of mail, or we want to reduce the amount of anything that has to be signed now needs to be done online. But also, because people are just more comfortable with technology, they're expecting it to do more. And then it needs to be also the prep before you come on site. So the planning work, your risk assessments, your method statements, your permits, your insurance, your qualifications. It needs to be a far more interactive thing. Email is back and forth. The technology of the future, or the technology that some of the disruptors are doing now, has the ability to identify who the people are who are qualified to come on site. If there's any gaps in that, notify them electronically, and then give them all the tools to communicate with you online and upload the information, or actually take the training courses they need to take, and then identify, okay, you've met all the qualifications and controls, you can go ahead and come on site now. They can answer questions, upload documentation, not only before they come on site, but actually while they're on site as well. So if they come on site and they need to do something different, or they need to take another type of test, they can actually do all of that stuff in a much quicker way. So you're not confined to a certain way of the things that have to be done. Technology allows you to be involved with every part of the process. And any controls that you would have had before can be instantly applied. So if you're if the risks change and the controls need to change, then whatever needs to be done from a compliance point of view should be able to be done instantly. And one of the other things then is, I used to use the example when I was talking about technology can do anything, but it shouldn't. And I actually would use the example, technology has the ability for you to sit at home, fill out a permit, identify all of the work that you're going to be doing on a manufacturing site that's 20 miles away. I get the risks, get the controls, get a map, get your security access, everything you need to go in, walk on the site, go straight to the place where you're going to work, get to work, do your work, clean up, finish, and leave, and never actually talk to a person. And that example was an example that I would use when I was saying technology can do anything, but that doesn't mean that it should. And I actually think that it's really ironic now, because actually technology can do that, and that in certain cases, it actually should do that. And it's done through safety check-ins with photos, videos, risk assessments can be reviewed in real time using apps on your cell phone. And what we're going to do, or what we're slowly moving towards, is from remote visibility. And Nick, you talked a lot about visibility. And when we're talking about, the value of using electronic system, a lot of what we're talking about is the visibility. But we're moving from remote visibility to remote interactivity. So when we're doing something, not only can you, when we're performing work, when we're performing high risk work, not only is there visibility so people know that that work is being carried out, but we can actually communicate with people who are far away and get approval and get confirmation about whether or not something is safe to go ahead. And so that's one of the, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, could I just tackle something else off as well? Because I'd like to tackle off, and it may be relevant to some of those that are listening in here, but it's actually the opposite of remote interactivity. And it's actually where you have a situation where you've actually got very close relationships with your contractors. We've, in the past, so there's an example, I've spoken to an organization, and they wanted to implement controller work processes in North America, but within a distribution center. And one of the main guys, head of maintenance, was on the call. I said, "Oh no." He says, we deal with a small number of contractors, and we get on really well with them. Essentially, it's the same group of people all of the time. It's the refrigeration. It's the people, so this was a distribution center. So it was, the refrigeration contractors. And therefore, as a result, something that was technological was too big. In the past, it was too big. But actually, it was a case of, look, Jim, Bob, look, me, come on, let me on site. And therefore, the whole implementation of a control process for these people just didn't feel right. The simple fact is that now in this COVID world, that whoever we trust, we can't trust anymore when it comes to making sure that they're compliant. And actually what technology now enables you to do is actually pass the blame. Sorry, it's not me. We've now got a system, COVID, you have to understand, whereby, look, it's just a control process. So the big thing for me now is that technology and COVID is moving us away from an informal, where there were a smaller number of contractors, where we had strong relationships. It has enabled us to put in place controls, simply and make sure that there is 100% confidence. I can't stress enough, it's that 100% confidence. Machines don't care. Technology doesn't care who you are, whatever like that. If you aren't compliant, you ain't coming on.
That's a very nice way to finish it up. Nick, if you aren't compliant, you ain't coming on. Scott, will we hand it back to you, or if there's other questions that we were able to answer, we're happy to do so.
Yeah, I think you did a good job getting to most of the questions through the presentation. I don't see any additional ones. I think to your point, to Pat, Nick, that was a great kind of summary of things that weren't risky before are now risky today, and instead of relying on those informal relationships or manual processes, let's get some proper controls in place with visibility and traceability, and make sure that we keep our employees safe, we keep our families safe, and we keep the community safe. Because obviously we don't quite have a lid on things just yet. So thank you guys so much for your presentation. Obviously we covered a lot of ground today, but if there's any questions out there, absolutely reach out to Pat and Nick. I know they'd be more than happy to answer any additional questions that you guys have. Their contact information will be available. We'll have the presentation on demand as well, and any supporting materials that they'd like to provide. So we encourage you to reach out and connect with them.
Crystal, if you email me directly, I will talk to one of our clients who has dealt with technology in an EX-rated environment and see what their advice is.
Yeah, that intrinsically safe devices, I know, is always a challenge in some industries. So as promised, we were gonna do the draw for the VIP sessions that again Safety Guard has sponsored, and our technological randomizer was failing us today. We were hoping to make it exciting and show everybody on the screen, but it's not working. So we're going with the first question that was posed today. Crystal Awalda, she posed the first question, so she's going to get the first VIP session, and then we ran the randomizer on the list, and Dave Janney's name came up. So Crystal and Dave are the two winners of the VIP sessions today. So tomorrow, or I will be reaching out afterwards to get you those packages, and we'll send out some information to everybody so they can learn more about Safety Connect, our virtual health and safety conference that's coming up in October. So with that, I think we will close things down. Thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate your time. And like we said, if you have any more questions for Pat and Nick, they're there to help you guys out. So thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Saferpedia.
Thank you very much.